Hello and welcome to a tutorial on Coptic stitching. So I've gone ahead and prepared all of my signatures. So I have 5 signatures of 15 pages each. So essentially there are 30 pages, as aka 60 faces each. I've folded them in half and I've put holes in them. And what I do is I use a guide to make sure that I'm getting the holes in the right spots. So that's pretty straightforward. So I've got my 5 signatures. I also have my covers. So this is the back cover of my journal. And I've gone ahead and placed holes in those as well. I've hammered holes in those as well. This is the front cover. And you can see the holes. You can see them better from the back side because the felt sort of hard to see them here. So I'm working with a card, or it's like a cardstock, like a really heavy chipboard kind of thing, and I've covered it with fabric. And I'm just using regular printer paper, no lines for my signatures. So I have some thread. And I've got about 5 feet of thread, and what I'm using is embroidery floss with all 6 of the strands, so it's nice and thick. I've chosen a color that matches nicely with my cover, and I have a needle here, see if you can see it, which does not have a point. It's just like a darning needle, so it's a blunt needle. So what I'm going to do is get the back cover. I'm starting with the back cover, and what I've done here is I've just got like a little platform so that my book is sort of at eye level for myself. So I'm just looking at the holes here and starting my Coptic stitch with the back cover and the last signature. So what I'm going to do is go from the inside of the bottom or top hole and pull my thread all the way through except for a little tail at the end. So I want to leave about maybe 3 inches at the end. And then I'm going to go ahead and wrap it around the bottom of the cover and up and through. And then I'm going to go back into that same hole in this first signature. So you can see I'm coming up through the same hole. So now I have gone around the bottom of the cover and up and through, and I've got both of my threads here now inside the signature in the same hole. And what I'm going to do is just tie a knot to secure that end. So just like a double knot. Nothing too special. Okay, so that's nice and tight too, like I've really snugged that up. So now I can continue. So I've got my knot tied and I'm going to go now in to the second hole. And down and around through the bottom of my cover and up. And then back into the second hole, into the middle. And I'm definitely making sure to keep my thread nice and tight so that my book binding is going to be nice and tight. So then I go back inside. So here's my little tie from the first thing, and out underneath the cover, through the hole, up, and then back into that third hole of my signature. Again, pulling really tightly, make sure that my string is nice and tight. Then over to the fourth hole. Underneath my cover and up through, and then back through that fourth hole in the signature. And then through the fifth hole and up in my cover. There we go. Now Because I'm at the last hole of my signature, my first signature, I want to pull it nice and tight so that all of these stitches are nice and tight. And then instead of going in through the hole of that last signature, I'm going to get my next signature and go through that hole instead. So now I'm starting stitching on my second signature. Okay, so I've gone in through that hole, pulling it nice and tight, and then through the inside and back out. And then this is what's called a kettle stitch. So now I'm through the second hole, and what I do is I run my needle sideways, and I want to basically just loop around that bottom stitch that I made with my first signature. So you can see there that I've looped around, and so I'm going to pull that nice and tight and go back through the second hole in my second signature. Okay, again, making sure that's nice and tight. Then over to the inside again, through the third hole, another kettle stitch. Again, that's sort of a sideways stitch. It's a little tricky to get the needle out. So I'm holding on to that stitch there, right? Pulling nice and tightly, and back into the second signature, just continuing on with my kettle stitch. Back through. And out through the last hole, nice and tight, pulling my thread nice and tight. And my final kettle stitch on this signature. And then, just like we did the first time, instead of going back through the second signature, I'm going to get now my third signature and go through that. So now I'm adding on my third signature. And yes, definitely pull your thread nice and slowly, or else you get these little knots. You don't want them. Okay, so pulling my thread through and inside the signature now, back out. And pretty important at the beginning of each signature to make sure you're pulling nice and tightly, because that's your join from one signature to the next. So now I'm going to continue with a kettle stitch, but instead of going to that bottom area where the cover and the first signature meet, I'm now going to go between the first and second signature. So still the sideways stitch, but between the second and third, or sorry, first and second signature. Okay, so around and then back into my hole. And the way I hold it, I find it's really handy if I sort of keep my hand inside the signature, then I can just sort of flip it open when I want to see where my needle is. Okay, so and then back. And we're out here again. So now kettle stitch in between the signatures again. Pretty easy to get your needle stuck in there. I don't know if there's a trick to that or what, but I just sort of fish it out with my fingernail. And back in through. Tuck my hand in there. There I can see it nice and easily. Pulling the thread nice and tightly. our next signature, we're going to do the same thing with the front cover. So here I've got my final kettle stitch, and now I have my cover that I can stitch in. So I've got my last kettle stitch, and I'm going to go up and around whoops, and back into the last signature again. Okay, this is really going to reinforce your cover because you're attaching it right into the next signature. So out, up, around, kettle stitch, and back into this last signature. Making sure my thread is nice and tight still, right? Okay, there's my hole there. There it is. Through, kettle stitch, and into the last signature again. Now, I've seen some people like to do their last signature and cover combined. And I've done that before too. And I think that's a great way to do it. I like the extra reinforcing that this gives, doing it this way. So you can do whatever you like, of course. Maybe I'll do a tutorial of that technique as well, just to show the difference. Back in, and our last stitch is coming up. There my cat's coming to say hello. Hi, Chloe. Okay, and in through, so nice and tight, right? In through the last signature. So now what I need to do is just thread this in and around and tie a couple of knots. Okay, so I've done 2 knots, and that's going to secure it there. And then what I'm going to do is just snip the ends here. I don't mind having a little tag. I think that's a really nice touch when you have a personal customized journal. So now here is my journal. Here's the little tail from my first signature. I'm going to snip that down just so that it doesn't hang out so much. And you can see here is my stitching. So if you look up close, hoping that you can see that. It's just a really nice sort of weave in the stitching. And here's my journal. I've got this awesome color here that matches my covers. My signatures have, in the middle of my signatures, I have the threads. And super, super solid binding for my new journal. Hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Thanks very much for watching.